we're trying to, like, cells want to hold their juices in. And we want the cells to give their juices up, because that's the liquid that we're going to submerge the vegetables under. And so, if we want the cells to give up their juices, we have to, like, bruise the cell walls. We have to bruise the vegetables, break down the cell walls. So, one way to accomplish that, like when people do this in a big barrel, they get like a blunt tool, a tamping tool, and like pound down on it. Or they put somebody inside the barrel, usually like a child with scrubbed feet, and let the kid jump up and down, and it accomplishes exactly the same thing. Or, I mean, this really represents like an extreme of doing it by hand, but, you know, if you're doing it at this scale or this scale, it's really much easier to just, you know, spend 5 minutes squeezing it in the bowl and you accomplish exactly the same thing, bruising the vegetables. You can tell when you've done it enough when the vegetables are all glistening and moist, and you have an accumulation at the bottom of juice. So that's really what we're looking for. It's like, you know, wilted, moist vegetables and an accumulation of juice. And at that point, you just take your vessel, whatever it is. Here, we'll take one of these. We'll just take one of these jars. One thing I'd recommend is just rinsing the jars before you use them. I mean, factory fresh. And then you just take it, and then, you know, you stuff it in the jar, and then as soon as you think that it's full, it's not. Then you just put it down, and you have to really stuff it in. This is where, I mean, it can be easier if you have a nice blunt tool. I know the West Today Price Foundation chapter in Eugene, Oregon is marketing a cute little tool that they call the Kraut Pounder, and it's just like just a blunt thing that will fit right inside of a mason jar, but you don't need that. You just use your fingers, press down, and if anyone hasn't seen this before, just come and look at this.
What about whole vegetables? You know, how do you bruise them so that they start giving out the juices?
Well, that's the reason why with whole vegetables you usually do it in a brine, because it's not really possible. So if you wanted to incorporate whole vegetables in here, let me see, are there any more radish? No, okay, there were some.
We were very efficient.
There were some, but you know, you could just like put a whole vegetable in the middle of that, but you know, it really needs to be in a watery environment that you can only create, you know, for vegetable juice by creating surface area and bruising them a little bit. So this is what you're trying to do, is like just push down to get the vegetables submerged under liquid. And that's the essential condition for fermenting vegetables. You avoid getting the surface mold on the vegetables by getting the vegetables submerged under their own juices.
So you could put layers of more whole vegetables to create a pattern too, especially so they make it a really pretty gift when you give it to someone, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, you can do that. And then there's a little bit of extra juice at the bottom, so you know, after everyone stuffs their jars, we'll be able to pour a little bit of extra juice under each one. But what you have to understand is, no matter how much juice you put in, just in the same way that your body will want to float in the ocean, these vegetables will want to float in the salty water. So, you know, you'll always have a little bit of vegetables floating up at the top. So there's a few ways to deal with that. One is you can like find a smaller jar, a little jelly jar or a mustard jar. Fill it with water and let that be a weight bearing down. You can also, you know, take a big radish and cut a fat slice and put it on top there. And then when you screw down the top, it'll effectively do the same thing. When I do this at home in a crock like this size, I find the biggest plate I can find that sets on top of the vegetable, and then I fill up a jug with water, a gallon-sized jug, and so I have a weight continuously bearing down, which is the same idea as filling a jelly jar with water at this scale. But the thing is, at this scale, you don't really need to do that. I mean, we can just put this in here like this, and there's very little air space. So even though vegetables are going to float to the top, there's really not a lot of air for them to be able to create mold. But pressure is going to build up in this. So in a canning jar like this, the jar will not explode. The jar is pretty thick, but the top will bend until the air can escape, and it will build up pressure. So what I do in this condition is I leave this on my kitchen counter where I'll see it every day, and then especially the first couple of days, which is when you'll get the most vigorous pressure buildup, bubble formation. I just open it each day, release the pressure. While I'm at it, you know, I can use a spoon or my fingers and just press down, just get the top submerged, and that's really adequate. Another technique that somebody reminded me about last night is you can fill a little baggie with water or salty water and put that baggie on top, and then you have a pressure bearing down. You know, with a wide mouth like this, you could, you know, use a jar to press down, but if you use a more narrow neck design of a jar like this, and let's say you're full only to here, then a plastic bag is a really effective way of getting the whole surface covered. So trade-offs. You know, plastic is a really versatile material that enables you to squeeze into a small space and then expand. So, you know, do you want to trade off that convenience and the power of that to avoid molds for, you know, the possibility of some chemicals leaching from the plastic? I don't know. I mean, personally, I don't mind dealing with a little bit of surface mold. Like, the whole objective of getting vegetables submerged under liquid is to protect them from molds, but there's always this, you know, this surface where it's going to meet the air unless you engineer an air-free environment. And there are crops. There are these, they're called harsh crops. They're imported from Germany, and they're actually based on an old Chinese design. But basically, the top of it is a V. You fill it with water, and then there's a lid that fits inside that V of water, like a moat. So that creates an airtight environment. What I don't like about that design is the whole thing is predicated on the idea of not opening it until you're ready to harvest it. And like, I like to taste it all the time and see how it's developing. So, you know, if you're willing to just pick an arbitrary date and leave it closed until that date, then that design might make sense. But really what people historically have always contended with is, you know, just scraping off the surface mold, discarding that, and what's beneath it is really fine. The longer you let the surface mold grow, the more there's the opportunity for the mold to change the texture of the vegetables and ultimately influence the flavor of the vegetable. But if you're pretty good about scraping the mold off within a couple of days of when it forms, it's really not going to influence the flavor or the texture, and you don't have to worry about mycotoxins or anything like that.
What I've been thinking about doing is drill a hole in the top of the and stick a beer bubbler thing in. But one time you mentioned putting a balloon on top. Would that be something that you could do with this? I think you were talking about a balloon for maybe making meat or something, but could you just stick a balloon on top?
Well, they're actually the product that someone is marketing. They call it the perfect pickler. And it's basically this exact jar, a wide-mouth mason jar, but instead of the metal top, it has the plastic top. A hole drilled in that, a little rubber gasket, and an airlock that's made for beer and wine fermentation. Absolutely. Then the one other thing the Perfect Pickler has that's very cute is, you know what a ramekin is? It's sort of like a ceramic version of something like this. That, you know, they might bring you salad dressing or mayonnaise in a restaurant. So you put the ramekin in here, and then when you put the top on, it pushes the ramekin down. The ramekin pushes this whole thing down and gets everything fully submerged under the liquid. So there's a lot of clever ways that you can engineer an environment that is oxygen-free. But if you want to taste it as it progresses, then every time you open it, you're eliminating the advantage that you have, like, engineered. So, you know, personally, I just do what I call the open crock system, where I don't worry about making an oxygen-free phase, and I just, like, scrape a little. Oh, look at that. Yeah, get your, like, ceramic friend.
Someone made it for me.
Wow.
Very elegant.
High-fired, you know, totally non-reactive.
That's great.
That's totally wonderful. So, but like, the main thing I want everyone here to understand is, like, if you should encounter surface